Let me introduce you to Woodpecker's new Saw Gauge 2.0. Whether your table saw is brand new or 30 years old, it's vital that both the saw blade and rip fence are perfectly parallel to the miter gauge slot. Now let me show you how it works. The saw gauge uses a patented approach to make up for any variations in your miter gauge slot, and it does it with these three simple round pins. The two small ones go on the bottom, and then they're straddled by what we call the cradle, and the cradle pushes out the small pins. So as you traverse along your slot, it really doesn't matter what the width is, whether it's tapered or not. It's always going to fit perfectly. That's the secret to the saw gauge. Slide the saw gauge to roughly the center of your blade and then tilt it down to close to the throat plate. That just gives you a little bit more travel, gives you a little more accurate indication of whether or not that blade is parallel. Once you have in this position, you can just turn the bezel to 0 and then go ahead and slide it to the in-feed end. When you're watching the indicator, if the needle moves counterclockwise, that means that the object is moving closer to the indicator. If it's moving clockwise, it's moving away from the indicator. So once you have this, an idea of whether or not it's parallel, look at your table saw's owner's manual, make the necessary adjustments to adjust the trunnion to get the blade parallel to the miter gauge slot. Now before we get to the rip fence, you might be wondering why we call this Saw Gauge 2.0. The original saw gauge, which came out about 9 years ago, did pretty much the same thing that I just got through showing you. It was designed optimally for the saw blade, didn't really have the travel needed to deal with the rip fence. That problem has been solved with our new Saw Gauge 2.0. The kit comes with 2 extensions. These we assemble Okay, once we've got both extensions attached to the main piece of track, just slide it right back into the base, get it approximately centered. Doesn't have to be perfect, just anywhere roughly in the middle will help balance this whole thing out. Now when you're using it to check your rip fence, it's a little different process. On the saw blade, you can easily slide it the entire length. It's only about 7 or 8 inches you can get to without much of a problem. On the rip fence, you're really taking spot measurements. So I have it set up, and it doesn't really matter exactly where you put it. Like I said, just roughly center it. This acts as a counterweight. Bring the rip fence up to the plunger and set the bezel to 0. And now we're going to move it to the middle of the fence. And then you would want to jot down that measurement. In this case, the fence is kicked out a little bit. It's reading about 6 thousandths of an inch. And when I get to the outfeed end, it's about 12 or 13 thousandths of an inch. It's that simple. Go ahead and make the adjustment. It changes, from saw to saw, whether you move the rail or make the adjustment in the clamp mechanism. But it's that easy to get your rip fence set up perfectly parallel to the miter gauge slot. Set up your table saw for better cuts with Woodpecker's new Saw Gauge 2.0.